Item number 10, which is the Auckland Council Policy on Dogs and Dog Management Bylaw Statement of Proposal that was referred to the Regulatory Committee. If I could ask Michael Sinclair, our Policy Manager, and Kataraina Maki, General Manager, to come forward. And I'm going to, Councillor Cooper, you might like to move the resolution, and do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Cashmore. And if I could ask you, Councillor, as Chair of the Regulatory Committee, to introduce the item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is at a certain point in a long process of around 2 years already, where we offer up a statement of proposal developed over the last 2 years by our staff between the Regulatory Committee and the local boards. There has been some concern from one visiting councillor at our last meeting that the public hadn't been involved. Well, that's because we're up to the point now where we do put it out to the public. So there's no irregularity around that. That's just normal practice. In 2017, our staff came to us with a review of the bylaw, and that is common, that is expected practice with bylaws. We have to review them every 5 years. And this one is nearly 7 years old because it takes so long. So we must go out to the public almost as soon as we adopt this, because if we don't, our bylaw will be obsolete and we'll have no ability to enforce any dog rules whatsoever. So if people complain to us and say, come and do this, we'll say, sorry, we've got no legal right to do so. So it's very important it's not delayed any further. We've come nearly to the end of those 7 years. The findings, the review came back, the findings came to us, and we decided as a regulatory committee that it was appropriate to, that there were things that could be done better. And so a options paper went out to local boards. There were 42 workshops, so each had a workshop. And there was some, we've had a bit of raru around formal or informal reports, but that is being worked on between local boards and the governing body, how we do these processes better in future. But there was a lot of feedback captured from local boards at workshops, and some chose to formalise their views. Now we have a statement of proposal that we put forward to you. It was changed from when it was presented at the board because we've added an option, another option, and that's option H in the recommendations on page 24, which actually was implicit anyway, that we could stick to what we're already doing if the public feedback said that, but that it's explicit now that we can change or we can stay the same, pretty much. So that was unanimously adopted at the Regulatory Committee. So the Regulatory Committee and I commend this report to you for adoption to go out to the public, and Michael and Kataraina are pretty much experts on this now after all this long time, so they may want to talk more about it, and we'll be able to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Michael or Kataraina, would you like to add to that? Just to make explicit what Councillor Cooper said, we're going out now to public consultation, and the public will be consulted on whether you have a consistent rule across the region or whether that simply is the default position and local boards are able to amend the details of times, etc., according to local perceptions. But Michael or Kataraina, who would like to speak to that? Michael.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just refer to Table 1 on page 28 of your agenda. In that table, there is a summary of 12 amendments to both the policy and the bylaw that are being proposed through the statement of proposal, one of which is the question around the use of the standard time and season definition, which Your Worship has referred to. Happy to take the report as read and take any questions around those, but just highlighting the fact that there is a range of amendments that we're dealing with today, not just the one which seems to be the hot issue in the media, in the public.
Thank you very much, Michael. So let's take questions first. I recognise Councillor John Watson, and welcome back, John.
Yeah, just a question on the layout, on the visual of visuals of the statement of proposal on page 42 in the statement, it seems to be anyway. The section's highlighted in yellow. What's the purpose of the yellow highlighting?
We just, through the chair, we just wanted to identify for all councillors who particularly were at the regulatory committee to show we had made the changes that were that the new resolution. Right, great. But in the documentation that goes out, it won't have that yellow. Yeah, correct. Okay, so and I think you've done quite a good job of that. What we are proposing, concerns raised, and an alternative option. So thank you for spelling those things out clearly, because I think that was certainly what was requested by a number of groups and also local boards. As far as the consultation process itself goes, I just want to ask a thing about the feedback, and just the last page there, give us your feedback. Online services and paper copies of the materials are available at our libraries. Now, does that mean that people can submit on paper copies and hand them into the library or the council service centres?
That's correct. It's standard practice that any consultation that we would do would be made available through libraries and service centres, and there would be hard copies and access to the online submissions through the libraries.
Okay, great. Final question, and it goes to, I guess it goes to what's mentioned in the timeline on page 31 of the agenda, 1st of April when it's out. Staff have recommended that the committee delegate authority to staff to receive public feedback through spoken interaction at Have Your Say events as appropriate. So when we record that spoken feedback, given that, you know, some people will be going online, some people will be handing in paper copies, that spoken feedback, I'm assuming that individuals aren't identified on that. It's just more a summary of what people are saying. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, yeah, okay. And is that standard practice, or is that something new we've just started here?
Have Your Say events is becoming more standard practice across consultation the council does, including through activities such as the annual plan and long-term plan processes. It's a way of enabling more detailed and in-depth conversations with individuals and enabling us to access a wider variety of people than would normally be engaged with the formal hearings process, and to be able to engage at places and at times that is more conducive to getting the input from a wider range of our community.
It also will mean that people can sort of record on multiple occasions theoretically too, doesn't it?
That's great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I think those questions were very helpful in elucidating what process we will now follow. Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just four quite pragmatic questions, Your Honour. The first one is just seeking some advice or clarification on...
Yeah, I probably, with deference to our judicial community, should correct you, Councillor. That's not one of my titles. But thank you for the promotion.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I'm referring to page 43, and the wording there around decisions leading to proposed changes, and in the box here in August, it's marked August 2018 local board resolutions. I understand there's some advice from officers to update us or the colleagues here about potentially taking out the word local board resolutions in that box because the local boards haven't made resolutions, they've actually given feedback. And I think there's just, if we could just have clarification if that was going to be removed.
So should we take the answer to that question now? Michael.
So just to clarify, in August 2018, there was an opportunity presented for all of the local boards to formally resolve their positions, and that had been previously provided through workshops held in June and July of 2018. There was a range of responses to that, and which meant that the reports weren't put onto formal agendas, but that there was alternative ways for that feedback to be formally captured. And the feedback that was formally captured and provided to us was provided to the Regulatory Committee in November 2018.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers, do you have some further questions?
Yeah, just clarification on that. I'm not sure if that means that that will be taken out or not, because I understand feedback has come through also through local board advisors, and that not all that feedback's been through a formal resolution, Mike. So I just want to get that clear. So is that wording going to stay in there or come out?
If we receive direction from this committee to change that so that it doesn't specifically include the word resolution, we would be happy to do so.
It might be helpful just to refer to Glenn Boyd, the Acting General Manager of Local Board Services. I just had an update earlier, just when the meeting had already started, Chair, that there might be a recommendation that actually comes out. You probably haven't had a chance to be briefed on that yet, Mike. I don't know if anybody else around the table can clarify that.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure of the background of it, but if they were resolutions, the statement is correct. If they weren't resolutions, it should come out. But I don't know whether there's any other.
Maybe we could make a note of that and it could be followed up.
Is there anything else that you can elucidate about that? I simply don't know the background, whether that is a factual statement or whether there are those that want it withdrawn if it is not factual. If it's factual, it should stay in. If it's not factual, it should come out. Councillor Cooper, maybe you can throw some light on that.
Sorry, I'm just wondering if I can shed some light on this. There was a report put up, but for some reason it wasn't supported by local board services to go to the local board. So our staff have done their very best to try and get information. So I've personally had a high number of memos signed off by the chair to say this is our board's feedback. They may not have been resolutions, but really it doesn't seem material, because what's really important here is the information we got from the local board chairs that has said this is our view of our board. So I think that's what's really important. But if it's such a big issue to take the word out, it's going to make no difference to anybody. It's really about getting the public's feedback, and we've had a lot of local board feedback, and there will be more opportunity for local boards in this hearing process as well.
Well, perhaps the easy thing to do is just local board feedback on the issues under review. I think that might solve your problem, Councillor. And if you're happy with that, Councillor Cooper, let's amend it accordingly. Okay.
Sorry.
Further questions, Councillor Sayers.
I had 4 questions. Well, thank you for that comment, because what in my mind it's about the public perception of reading that document that there could have been resolutions passed. So I appreciate the direction that's been given there. Second, just for clarification, we've just covered this as picking up on Councillor Watson's earlier point in your introduction to Mike, that it is possible that different local boards could end up with different time and season rules. In other words, if it wasn't the generic one, there could be variances across Auckland. That's still a possibility.
Katarina?
So through the chair, that is the option that is currently in the statement of proposal for public feedback.
Thank you. And I'm making an assumption, but just like it clarified, could that mean that a group of local boards, I'm thinking perhaps local boards north of the bridge, that have beaches share beaches along the eastern seaboard, could cooperate and have a time and season rule that matches across all those beaches, even though they're across different wards and local board areas?
Yes, they could provide feedback that way.
And finally, my final question is just around human safety, and I asked this just to put it in context. It's to do with the 7 o'clock recommendation and the weighting or any consideration that's given to human safety of perhaps vulnerable members of our community having to access or unable to walk their dogs until 7 p.m. in the winter, which doesn't leave a lot of daylight. What considerations should be given to human safety in that context?
I think this is why we want to go out for public consultation, so the hearings panel can hear what the concerns of the community are, and it is likely for some members of the community that they will have concerns about the 7 p.m. time. It is the time that was most consistent across local boards, but this process will allow that to be debated on a regional level.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Desley-Simpson.
Your Worship, just a question around, obviously I think the process is very good. It's going out for people to have your say. So it's not saying this is going to be the final thing. This is an opportunity for people to have their say. But if there is going to be a variety ward to ward area, or even, no, it's board area to board area, there will be some signage costs associated with that. Has that been suggested, or how does the public sort of look at that and say, well, if we agree to this, actually we actually are also agreeing that it would need to have some associated signage and costs with that? Thank you.
Through the Chair, so generally all bylaws have some cost, and they are normally signage costs. You've got to remember that local access rules are not changing, so none of what we're doing here are changing the local access rules. So that's things like, is a dog allowed or prohibited, on leash or off leash? It's the time and season. So if a regionally consistent time and season rule comes in those areas where it's not the regionally consistent one, we will need to do sign changes in those areas and changes online.
Estimate for that, just so people, if the question's asked, we know.
Sorry, not off the top of our heads, we don't.
It might be useful sometime to come back. Most of the dog signs that I've seen around date back to the pre-amalgamation councils, and they'll be left in place. But if you change the rules, you're going to have to change the sign, and there will be a cost associated with that. That won't necessarily be the determining factor in whether we change the times. But let's hear what the public have to say on that. It's a fair question to ask. Councillor Josephine Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a comment, so I'll just take your guidance as when I can speak. Thank you.
Well, let's just focus on the questions first, and then we'll come to comments afterwards. So if you reserve your position on that, Councillor. Councillor Sharon Stewart.
Thank you. I was just wondering, with the you're saying that most of these submissions will be online. Is there the potential for people that are, especially retired people that don't have computers, or perhaps aren't very mobile and they can't get to libraries and things, could they actually write a page or whatever and send it in as free post to whatever the address is that it's for this hearing, for this Auckland Have You Say?
We will receive the submissions from the public in any form that they submit them. So if that is in writing, dropped off to a service centre or posted to us, then we will receive those as well. There is no obligation for that to be via an electronic avenue.
So it doesn't actually have to be on an official form. If somebody sends it in, and as long as it's on the envelope and it's free post, anybody can send in whatever information, and you'll be taking that as. Thank you.
In order to receive it as a formal submission, it needs to identify the name and a way of contacting, so either an address or an email address of the member of the public. There's no other obligations around the form that submission would need to take.
And just to clarify, it is free post, is it? I wasn't aware of that. Maybe we could just get some clarification of that. Yeah. Otherwise, the answer is, as long as you put your name and your address, you're free to submit in whatever form you'd like. I'm just not sure that we do it free post.
No. It's just that I know that with the Auckland Have Your Say that's out at the moment, that's a free post, so people are just going to put it in an envelope and they're going to post it in. That's what's on the front cover of the Auckland Have Your Say. So I was just that's the reason I asked the question about for this. Could people do that as well?
Let's just get some clarification.
We will definitely look at whether we can have those free posting.
Yeah, I just don't want to send the message out that it is free post if it isn't, and I don't know. So if you can come back to us on that, and to Councillor Stewart, that'd be helpful. Councillor Casey, last question.
I'm on the dog hearing panel, and so I won't be making any comment about the content, but I do have a question about the consultation. The period of 6 weeks, which begins in, I'm looking at our page 31. So, are we sending a statement of proposal out to 102,000 dog owners with the renewal for dog registration?
We have an obligation to advise all registered dog owners of any changes to the rules, so they will be directly contacted. It won't be with their registrations because the timing does not directly align with it, but we are looking at options of using the database that we have for all of the registered dog owners to ensure that they are made aware of the consultation as we're required to do under the Dog Control Act.
So will that be a letter or an email or either or?
We're looking for the cheapest way for council to be able to do that. So it would be email contacts in the first instance. Where we don't have emails, then we would need to provide a letter to those dog owners that we don't have an email contact address for.
Thank you. Have you at this stage got any idea how many Have Your Say events and what's the spread of them across the region?
We're still looking to confirm final dates and venues, but we're looking to be holding 8 Have Your Say events across the region, and they will be geographically spreaded so that we have north, south and west represented as well as central, and also a mix of urban and rural.
Waiheke?
We haven't got plans for a specific one on Waiheke at this point in time.
It would be a good idea.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Well, I'm also on the dog panel, so I'm not going to make any indication of my position, but I've got a question around process, and I'm picking that we're going to have an enormous number of submissions. I'd suggest that there could be a substantial number of submissions that are pro forma, and also that they may focus on the alternative option around the time and the like, and as Councillor Say has indicated, may go to the area north of the bridge. So is equal weight going to be given to pro forma submissions? Obviously that's a bit of a judgment call, but in terms of the numbers game?
I suppose we would say that submissions aren't totally a numbers game,
Sure.
but weighting is what the hearings panel that you are on will do, and you will, I assume, consider all submissions. We will get a lot. Dogs is a controversial issue, and people feel impelled to provide their comments. So I am sure that they will be all weighted and thought about through quite clearly.
And the other question I've got just goes to the process where people front up at a panel. In a situation where we could have a lot of people making submissions that are very, very similar, it may be very expeditious for the panel to hear a limited number of people that are representing a much larger number. I don't know whether that's a process that council can facilitate or not. Obviously, people have got a right to be heard, but if we're in a situation where we're hearing many submissions and the content is similar, it's going to take us quite some time. So I just wonder how we're going to handle that.
We will think very carefully about how to organise the Have Your Say events in terms of numbers. Quite a lot of people who want to do pro forma submissions don't always want to come to Have Your Say events because they know they will be participating, do the formal submission process. But yeah, we will think very carefully about numbers, how much time we have available to accommodate those numbers, and then the different needs of the people coming to have your say events. So we do know that from previous experience with Freedom Camping, some people actually want a presentation at those events and a Q&A session, and we'll be thinking about how we manage that, along with those people who just want to talk quietly with an officer and have, or an elected member, and have their views heard. So we will have to think about venue size, the amount of time available in order to manage that for dogs.
And I guess the last question just goes to, again, information that goes to decision making. And that's around this principle of one size fits all, which we're not necessarily applying elsewhere across the region, say as it goes to Freedom Camping, where there can be differences from one area to another and so on. So are we going to be receiving some information around the differences across the region as much as the similarities?
I think the part of bylaws and the Auckland Act is that we went through 3 or 4 year period where we had to get all the mini bylaws into single consistent regional bylaws. So that was a long process that you were involved with. One of the key areas where local variation is a key part of the system is dogs. So local boards make local dog access rules. They were delegated by governing body to do that. The one kind of rule that was kept at the regional level was the time and season rule. So in all the variation we have in the local boards, it was intended to be the one thing that would remain the same. However, that hasn't occurred, and so this process will re-examine that. So you will, of course, get a range of views between whether regional consistency is needed or whether it should just be maintained locally.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Katerina. I was temporarily distracted in an issue, and it may have been asked, but in my area, there are people confused on the jurisdiction around Te Puna Maunga Authority and that of other areas. I just wonder whether you might like to comment on this and how we can make quite clear in the process of consultation the various jurisdictions.
So the Maunga Authority is responsible for the Maunga of Rasili, which are areas that are accessible to the public. There are rules in the policy which refer to publicly available, privately managed spaces. So the Maunga would fall within that category. Currently, that rule is that unless they're specified in the schedules, then it will be up to the people responsible for that to determine what that rules are, and they would indicate that to the public through signage. The feedback that we've received from the Maunga Authority is that for the 2 Maunga that are specifically referenced in the schedule, they are happy for those rules to remain in the schedule. For the other Maunga that aren't specifically referenced in the schedule at the moment, it would then be up to the Maunga authorities to determine what the rules would be in the place that they have jurisdiction and authority over. And just to note that we have added a information note into the bylaw to actually clarify that point as well.
Thank you. We come now for comments, and Councillor Bartley, you wanted to make a comment.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment is that I'm concerned that this process is becoming about the power struggle between local boards and governing body. And it seems like it's collateral damage to that particular issue. There's also my concern around consistency and that Auckland isn't the same. And I know that a lot of us councillors don't really want to, have to deal with more emails about why someone needs that extra 30 minutes to walk their dog on a beach. So what I do want to say is that I think that the staff have accurately reflected those concerns in terms of the time and season and the discussion that we had in regulatory on page 42, and they've clearly outlined a way forward, which I think is pretty good in terms of the alternative option. What I think we should be acknowledging is that this is about the Dog Control Act, which talks about the imposition on dog owners of their obligations to ensure dogs do not cause a nuisance, injure, endanger, or cause distress to other people, wildlife, or other animals. So I want to commend the staff for the inclusion, which was not in our previous policy, of the specific reference to the Code of Welfare, which outlines those obligations and minimum standards under the Animal Welfare Act for dog owners. So on that basis, I support these recommendations up here and thank the staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and some very valid comments here from Councillor Bartley. I would also echo the sentiment that I think now is the time for our communities to speak, and they've been given a good time to speak. 6 weeks is a good time, and certainly the council is bending over backwards to accommodate all manners of feedback, whether online, in person, or have your say events. I'm pleased, as with Councillor Bartley, that it has now been spelt out very clearly what we are proposing, because there was some misunderstanding as to what was being proposed. I thank the officers for raising, albeit in a relatively brief form, the concerns raised, but they have been highlighted, and the fact that there is now an alternative option, because without stating the obvious, it's becoming very clear that in significant parts of Auckland, people are going to have an alternative view. They're going to be given the chance to front up for that. But I think in terms of the council's reputation and not putting people through unnecessary angst, that people realise that, well, this process now is for you to express what you want in your area. And I have absolutely no doubt that there is going to be a massive response from various sections of Auckland, and I certainly look forward to receiving that, and as indeed I'm sure people will look forward to making their views very clear to the hearings panel. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll ask Councillor Linda Cooper to close this
Thank
session.
you. And first, I just want to clarify with panel members that we don't do the old-fashioned hearing thing anymore. We have your say events, and we tailor each of our events to suit. And as was seen very swiftly, our staff turned something around a couple of weeks ago in Orewa, and we had 100 people turn up, and they didn't want to have it the way we had it, and said, okay, we'll change it. So I think we're very flexible in that regard to suit, but we don't sit in here and listen to people anymore. We go out to the people. The deliberations are in public, but that's the chance for the panel members to deliberate when we've heard everybody. I do just want to make a comment about the power play. I think it's been unfortunate over time that we've had comments going out before we even have the statement of proposal in front of us, and that can upset people. You know, we can unnecessarily upset people before we even have something in front of us. There's nothing for them to comment on, just a lot of hearsay and sometimes misinformation. So that's sad. That's been really difficult through this process. So I'm sorry, Councillor Bartley. A lot of that gets generated, that heat and light gets generated on the basis of not full information. So I hope that in future when we're doing these bylaws that we get to our statement of proposal and we go, hear the public, they've always got that opportunity, and I do want to hear from people, we all do on the panel, and then once we've made our deliberations, we'll bring the recommendations back to the governing body for adoption or amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'll put the motion, I've just got as amended because we changed the piece on page 27. So all those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Declare that carried unanimously. Right, we now come to the